Okay, welcome everybody. It is now 12:01. Let's give it another 30 seconds or so to let some of our other guests get logged in, and then we'll get started. Okay, well, hello and welcome back to our Speaker Success Program for WasteCon 2018. So, this program is all about you and how we can help you create and deliver really engaging educational programming at WasteCon this year. So during this second in our series of 3 webinars, we're going to go over some important dates and tasks, and we'll review the different roles for the members of your team and give you some guidelines and some tips on putting together your presentations and some guidelines for panelists and moderators. I'm Patsy Timas. I'm Director of Education and Certification for SWANA, and I'm your host for today's webinar. We also have on the line Lori Lawson, who's our Events and Training Assistant. Lori's your speaker concierge. She's here to help you with all things WasteCon. And right now, Lori's going to go over some of those important dates that are coming up very quickly. Lori?
Hi, it's a red letter day. June 24th is the last day to upload your information to SurveyMonkey. Remember, time runs out when the clock strikes midnight. Upload your information through SurveyMonkey and make sure you attend your coaching calls. If you need the link again, contact me, Lori Lawson, at 240-494-2243 or LLAWSON at SWANA.org. There are more important dates to remember. Attend the PowerPoint Tips webinar on June 27th if you are using slides. You will get easy tips for creating better slides. Make sure you register for the conference by June 30th. Also, confirm your hotel reservations by June 30th. If you are staying at the Gaylord, act quickly as the room block is filling up. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Lori. And I just want to remind all of you that there is a special discount code for the speaker rate of $550 for the full conference, and that code is SPKR18. So SPKR18 is your discount code, and of course, we'll be sending that out again in other communication. But if you want to get registered today to get a jump on things, that's your discount code. So, why are we all here? Because at WasteCon this year, we're telling our participants that it's all about you, meaning the participants. We're asking them what excites and motivates them about the future, what inspires them to find new opportunities and solutions, and then finally, what challenges you. So we're asking you, our moderators, our presenters, our team members, to keep this in mind as you pull together your presentations. People come to conferences because they want to solve a problem, they want to learn something new, and they want to meet other people who have similar challenges and who can help them. So try to make your sessions audience centric. Ask up front, what's on your mind? What do you want to know and learn? So the next thing we want to talk about is we want to get you involved in this webinar and asking you this question. Thinking about public sector solid waste executives, what do you think are the external forces that will impact their work for their communities? I'd like you to use the question box on the right-hand side and submit your answers. What do you think are the external forces that will impact public sector solid waste executives as they work for their community? And we'll take about a minute to do that, and then Jesse will let us know what some of the responses are. Wonderful. I see some responses coming in.
Yeah, so far we have, I'll read off some of them as they've been coming in. Elizabeth Rose said markets. Sarah Bolton said national sword, pressure to increase diversion. Susan Graff, consumer demand for recycling services. Doug De Cesare, politics. Robert Wadley said department budgets. Mervyn Jones, budget pressures. Ashley Smith, international restrictions on recycling. And Mervyn Jones, again, minimizing environmental impacts. So sounds like a lot of markets, recycling pressures, and of course, budgets.
Thanks, Jesse. And it also sounds like, our solid waste executives, they're going to have multiple external forces impacting the work they do for their communities. So thank you for your responses. So I have another question for you. What do you think are their highest priorities for sustainability of services to their communities? So we'll take another minute or so to think about that and then write your responses in the question box.
See, John Kellis wrote in, he said safety of employees. Sarah Bolton responded with balancing services offered with associated costs. Mervyn Jones wrote leadership. Elizabeth Rowe wrote in financial, efficient, and sustainable programs. And Mervyn Jones also wrote in health and safety.
Well, thank you again for your responses. And once more, it sounds like they have a lot on their plate. They have a lot to be concerned about. So, and this is the kind of activity that you can use in your sessions. Try to find out early what's on your audience's mind, what's keeping them up at night, what do they think about when they drive into work. And this will help you focus the conversation on what's important to them. So let's talk about the members of your team. So we have the moderator. And the moderator role, that's quite all right. So there are a number of members to your team, and one of those members being the moderator. And I'm going to say up front that you may not have a moderator in your session. That's totally up to you. But the moderator role, you'll need somebody who's going to be a leader. And the moderator role is essential in making the session successful, that leader role. So the moderator's the advocate for the audience, making sure they get what they paid for and hopefully more. So try to think of your audience as your customers. And the moderator's job is to give them information that they need or to entertainment and often to do both. It's one of the most difficult jobs, um, as you have to set the pace, maintain some control over not only the audience, but your panelists. You need to know when to back off and when to just let things roll. And remember, you're here to serve the audience first and the panelists second. So, show of hands, how many people on the call, you know, agree with that statement that your moderator is really there for the audience and not necessarily for the panel? Do you have a show of hands, Jesse? I can't really tell. But anyway,
The
here's
hands
some.
are popping up.
Great. All right, now that we're kind of all on the same page, here are some characteristics um, that we look for in a good moderator. We want them to be knowledgeable, uh, to know enough about the topic, the terms, the key issues, and the lingo to guide the conversation and ask thoughtful, probing questions when necessary. Um, the moderator needs to know how to facilitate the agenda, to keep the discussion on track, bring out different opinions, kind of be aware of body language, facial expressions on the panel to make sure that everybody gets to participate, and connect with the audience to bring them into the conversation. To ask, do you agree with what was said? Why? Why not? Bring the audience in often and early, and to be an instigator, to probe beneath the surface, ask tough questions of the panel, ask follow-up questions with the audience, keep the conversation lively, you know, and actually encourage and push the members of your panel to talk about specifics rather than generalities, and get the dialogue going with the audience and sustain the conversation in order to make sure they get their questions answered. And we're going to talk about that a little later, about getting questions from the audience. Another characteristic is to be an energizer, to model energy and enthusiasm, to work the room and engage the audience, and to inject a little humor where appropriate to keep things lively and moving. And lastly, but not least, is to be a neutral participant and objective. Uh, Very important to withhold your own personal opinions and judgment as a moderator, to let the panelists and audience have that conversation, um, and to not show any bias or favoritism towards any particular viewpoint um, or presenter. So it's very interesting. There was a survey conducted with over 500 executives and thought leaders who attended a recent conference, and 72% of them had not so much a criticism, but some advice for moderators. And here's what they had to say. They had to say a good moderator is prepared. And the research shows that it takes up to an hour to prepare for every 15 minutes of panel discussion. So be knowledgeable, have an agenda. Another observation they had was that good moderators need to manage the discussion and intervene in a timely and appropriate manner. So we've all been in some conference sessions or panel discussions where things were just kind of getting out of hand, and we need a moderator to have a firm grasp on the situation and get things back on track. Another observation they had was that a good moderator really needs to engage the audience early and often. I keep repeating that, but it's really important. So you're going to have sophisticated and demanding participants in your session. These are solid waste leaders and executives, and they expect to be part of the conversation. Um, Someone once said that there are probably as many subject matter experts in your audience as there will be on stage if you're using a stage. And a good moderator also doesn't dominate the conversation. Let the panelists and the audience have the conversation. So be a moderator who's knowledgeable, prepared, a facilitator, a connector, and ready to energize the room. So the other members of the team are the panelists. And I just have some simple ground rules for panelists. And I also want to add that we're going to be adding a number of resources for you on the cast member resources page, and that should be up very shortly. And a lot of this information is coming from multiple sources, but primarily Velvet Chainsaw Consulting, who's one of our partners, and also Kristen Arnold, who has a really good website called Powerful Panels. And here are some of her ground rules. One is follow the leader, work with your moderator. Two, be additive. If you agree, say so, then move on. Don't belabor the point. And remember that not everyone needs to answer every question if it's covered, unless you have something new to add. Point number two, um, just keep the conversation going. Another one of her guidelines is, keep your answers crisp and concise. We all have stories that help us explain our points, but we have an unplugged lounge, and you can save the backstory and go into more detail in smaller conversations in the unplugged lounge. Another thing is, jump in if you have something new to say. Um, One person talks at a time. Have healthy debates. Debate is good. Differing opinions help us figure out best solutions. Um, but keep it healthy, keep it positive. And the last thing, and this goes for moderators and panelists, is it's about the audience. It's really not necessarily about you. So no shameless promotion of either yourself or your company or product. So let's talk about developing a blueprint for your presentation. So again, thanks to our partners at Velvet Chainsaw Consulting, they put together some guidelines collectively for your team and as individual presenters to consider as you develop your session and your presentations. So when you're building your presentation, start with the end in mind and build up from that foundation. What are the learning outcomes you want to achieve? That's the question you want to ask. What is it you really want them to remember and take away from your presentation and the session as a whole? So start with the foundation. Then identify your supporting pillars. Once you know what you want your audience to remember, what you want them to learn, what your learning objectives are, then you can add your supporting points to those main ideas. And these supporting pillars serve as your discussion points and add context to the overall presentation. Discuss with your team what you think is going to be important to your audience. Identify what's in it for them. It's the old what's in it for me adage. Identify what you think is in it, what's going to benefit your audience. And that helps your audience understand the meaning of your presentation and why it's important before you give them the meat of your presentation. So when you start off, make sure you establish that early. Another guideline that they suggest is to discuss the backstory, but not to belabor it. So I know I just said, hey, save the backstory for the unplugged lounge, but um, stories hook people. And once you've started your presentation with why it's important for your audience, share a little bit of the story behind why that story connects to your presentation. And if you're doing something that's research based, tell the audience what drove you to look at something differently. You know, why did you do the research? Why did you come up with the conclusions you did? You know, just adding your personal perspective can help your presentation um, connect with your audience. And here's an important part, and I'm going to talk about this in the PowerPoint design webinar also, is dump the data. Data and facts don't necessarily persuade people. It's the story, the emotional connection, the visuals that you use that help explain your data that actually persuade people. So go light with the data. And I always say, if you have to apologize for a slide, then you probably shouldn't have it. If you have to say, I know you can't read this, then don't have it in your presentation. So when you have a lot of data, just give them the highlights. Tell the audience where they can get the data directly, either online, from you personally, a handout on the app, but just go over the highlights. The presentations are timed. You have several people that have information to share. So let's not spend valuable time on presenting the data. Let's present the results of the data, the conclusions of the data, why you think it's important, and how does it relate to your audience. So, and finally, you can put a cap on your presentation. You've built up from the foundation. Now you're at the roof, and you want to tell your audience again why things are important. Repeat the 2 or 3 main ideas, your learning objectives, what you wanted them to remember. And then also, once you've decided on all your content, add in your visual accents that tie in what you're going to be saying so they can see a visual representation of that. And I'll talk about some more about that on the PowerPoint design webinar also. So that's kind of just a quick recap of putting a blueprint together for your presentation. Really, don't start with the PowerPoint. Start with the outline of your main ideas and how you want to get those across. So the last component of your team is the audience. And this is some information from Powerful Panels again, and we'll post that. It's powerfulpanels.com. And they've got great videos and blog posts and even some tools that you can use in putting together your panel teams and your presentations. But let's talk about some things they recommend. So, Jesse, if you could advance the slide, let's talk about what would happen, what you can do before the conference. So you can start before WASTECON even begins and connecting with your audience. One of the things you can do is use the SWANA forums to get some buzz going about your session. You can tell folks that you're presenting what the main themes are, what they can expect to learn, and then you can ask them to post questions to you that you can then answer when you get to Nashville. So you can get that going and understand what your audience wants to know even before you get to Nashville. Also, as Mary Beth mentioned in our last webinar, we prepared some templates to make it easy for you to send out a press release about your participation at WasteCon. We have email templates so you can send out announcements to your professional network. Um, we encourage you to post on social media, whatever channels you're using. And if your company allows it or your organization, we have an email badge that you can append to your outgoing messages. Just some way to promote the fact that you're going to be at WasteCon, you're going to be presenting something important and interesting, and that you really want people to come. Another thing you can do is create a short 30 or 60-second video introducing yourself and your presentation. For instance, you could say, "Hi, I'm Sarah Edwards, and I'm presenting an overview of the circular economy at WasteCon in Nashville. Come participate in my quick fire Q&A session on Tuesday, August the 21st at 3 p.m. You'll learn the basics of a circular economy, its importance to municipalities and businesses, and how to apply those principles as you develop waste management strategies." So it could be something as simple as that, as short as that, and we would be able to use that in our marketing for your session. You can use it on your LinkedIn page or Facebook page. Uh, and we'll be happy to send you a link so you can send your videos to us, and we will share those in our digital marketing and on social media. And we hope that you would share those through your social media channels too. So what happens before the sessions? What can you do to engage your audience before the session begins? Conference has started and it's before your session. Well, you could put together a slideshow that has the pictures and bios of your panelists, that's going to run in a loop before your session begins, because pictures and bios are not going to be in the program this year. They're going to be on the app, but you can certainly have that going as an introduction to your audience before the session actually begins. Another thing you can use is question cards. Remember, we want to know what's on their mind. So you can pass out index cards as people walk in the door and ask them to write down one or two questions that they would like to have answered during your session. And then your proctor can collect the cards and give them to the moderator. And then a moderator can kind of screen those cards and choose to ask those during the presentation or after in a scheduled Q&A session. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing is to mingle. So mingle with the audience, chat with as many participants as you can before your session begins, before you get up on stage, if you are going to be on a stage, you know. Shake hands, thank them for coming, get to know some of their names and what they're interested in. And so you can use that information during your session. So one of the things that I've seen done is I was at a conference recently where everybody was in rounds and the presenters were actually sitting at those rounds. We didn't know they were presenters, but they were just, you know, starting up a casual conversation. And then they got up and did their presentations. So mingle's a good one to do before the session. And at the beginning of a session, what are some of the ways you can engage your audience? Just ask a question. Ask a provocative question. Get them thinking and participating. Encourage them to talk among themselves after you ask the question. So that gets people going. That gets the energy going in the room. And then finally, during the session, for panelists and moderators, walk about. I've seen some setups where all the panelists were actually standing. There were no chairs. They walked out into the audience. You know, they call it the Oprah style. Uh, Depending on the set of your room, you can have small group discussions. You know, in the middle, after a presentation, one of the panelists is presenting, you can say to the audience, hey, take two or 3 minutes and discuss what you just heard. and then you can have them debrief after that short exercise, meaning that those people who had the one-on-one conversations or small group conversations can then share with the bigger group what their conclusions or their takeaways were. Another thing you can do, and we'll talk more about the app, is to take a poll through the app. We can help you learn how to set these up on the app, and you can have them scheduled throughout your session. Um, Another idea is to do a hot seat. You just ask for a volunteer from the audience who's looking for some feedback from the panel, and you can allow them to state their situation or their issue, and then everyone on the panel can respond and give them advice or whatever. It's kind of like The Voice or American Idol or something like that. And then there's a standard or traditional Q&A. We want to make sure that whatever method you use to engage the audience and is that you have some time left over for Q&A at the end. A couple more things you can do to actually get them physically involved and engaged. One is nudge your neighbor. Periodically you can ask people to literally nudge their neighbor and talk to the person sitting next to them and say what was the most meaningful point made so far and how do they think it applies to their situation. Another one that can be fun is called Stand Up and Be Counted. This actually gets people out of their seats. If you're having a debate or you're having differing opinions on something, you can ask people in your audience, all right, let's take a vote on that. Those who agree with point A or whatever, stand up and move to the right. Those who disagree, stand up and move to the left. Or you can just simply ask them to raise their hands. Um, but it's something to kind of get them physically involved. And then finally, to summarize, and traditionally it's the moderator who summarizes the key points, but you can also ask an audience member to summarize the key points or have several audience members shout out what they think their key points were. The point is to get your audience involved, collaborate with them, involve them in your presentation. So I'm going to pause for a second here and ask if you have anything you would like to ask, or if you have any comments on what I've discussed so far, if you want to put those in the question box, and we'll give it about 30 seconds or so. And also, if you have any other tactics that you've used in the past, because I know that many of you are very experienced moderators and panelists. So what have you used to engage the audience?
Mervyn Jones says that it all makes sense to him, so that's good to hear.
That is good to hear. So, and let me ask you another question while you're thinking about that. So, what today has been most helpful to you today?
And Sarah Bolton said ideas on how to structure presentations and engage the audience. And Mervyn Jones says tips and tricks, especially pre-session tips. And Elizabeth Rowe writes, I think it's very important to remind people to never have an I apologize because I know you can't read this slide.
How many of us have been in a presentation where someone has said that and the font size has been like 8 point and you couldn't even read it if you were looking at it on a piece of paper. Um, Great. Thank you so much. I also want to kind of circle back when I asked you those two questions up front about um, issues that are concerning to public sector solid waste executives. And we had a number of responses. Think back to those and try to weave those into your presentations. Think about some of those issues and challenges that you identified that you think they have, and try to address some of those in your presentations. All right, so let's talk about the WasteCon app. We talk a lot about sustainability, and you'll find that this year we're really going to be pushing people to use the app. We're trying to cut down on paper, trying to cut down on the really thick uh, program that we've typically had. Um, and the app allows us to provide all that information and also real time updates. But it's also a great tool for you to use as presenters. Um, you can use the app before the conference to solicit questions, just like in the open forums on our website. You can solicit questions from participants who intend on attending your session, and we can show you how to do that. You can use the app during your session for live polls and surveys, and we can show you how to do that too. You can use the app to make any handouts or charts, graphs, whatever available to your attendees um, prior to your session and during the session. So if you um, do want to refer to some data, they can be looking at it in real time rather than trying to squeeze it onto a slide. So I encourage you all to download the app, get familiar with it. But if you need some help on how to use it, just get in contact with myself or Lori, and we'll be happy to show you how to do that. And we'll also be available at the cast rally and reception to help you do that. So let's move on. Jesse, thank you. Just want to remind you that not only do we want to say thank you by hosting this behind the scenes rally and party for all of you, but we'd like you to look at it also as an opportunity for your team to get together before WasteCon begins. So we're hosting that on Monday, the 20th at 5:30, just before the opening reception. We hope that all of you would be able to attend. And finally, we want to give a special thanks again to all our many WasteCon 2018 sponsors. And I want to thank all of you again for your time today. I know you're really busy. I appreciate um, you attending today's webinar. I am going to be posting many of the resources that I used to pull this webinar together on the resources page, and we'll be sending out a link to let you know when that's ready. We are looking for a really good show in Nashville this year. And I hope to see you next week on the PowerPoint design webinar. If you're using slides, it'll be a good one to attend. Some really quick, easy, simple ways to jazz up your slides. So that's all I have for today. And again, thank you for attending our Star Presenters Success Program. See you next week.